Hello, I'm Janine Nodder, and this is Chattin' with Janine. Some of you might know that this show has been on the air since 2006. And in the early days, I had a returning guest, Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, and I'm a founding member of the Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld Reading Foundation. So Dr. Blumenfeld always stressed reading and phonics. He's written many, many books. He is the author of Alpha Phonics. And he's no longer with us. He died, actually it's been several years now. But one of my colleagues at the State House is a reading specialist. So all three women that you see on the stage today are New Hampshire State representatives, myself included. And I'd like to introduce you to Representative Lori Ball. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And returning guest, Representative Vanessa Sheehan. Vanessa is a real estate agent, so we did a show just half hour ago on realty in New Hampshire, and I asked her to stay since we're all colleagues, and we all care about reading and children. And when the fourth graders come to the State House, sometimes I tell them, reading is such an important skill. It's like one of the most important skills, because if you can read, your education never ends. You can pick up a book and read about any topic of interest and self-educate on just about anything. Would you agree?
Very true.
So Lori, you are a reading specialist, just like you would have gotten along very well with Dr. Blumenfeld.
I absolutely would have. I have been fighting for phonics for over 30 years to get phonics back into the classroom in New Hampshire.
Wow. So tell us about it.
Well, it started when I have two sons. My older son we were told that he was the oldest one in kindergarten and still not reading at the end of the school year, so I was very concerned, and of course I ran right to the doctors with him to find out what was wrong. And I learned a lot about that and the physiological changes that take place in the brain, and how it was perfectly normal for him at 6 years old not to be reading. And then so we just moved forward, and he's fine. He did learn how to read. And then my younger son, he had many ear infections, and he had very immature speech. And of course I brought him to a specialist who told me, don't worry, because when he gets in school, they will teach him phonics, and he will learn how to read, but also his speech would be improved through learning phonics. Unfortunately, they never taught phonics by the time he got to school. They had already moved to different ways of teaching reading. And so he struggled for many years. His speech improved, but he had more difficulty in school, in learning. And that's when I started my quest on finding out, how do I help him? He was very good. His behavior was very good. It never got in the way of how he's behaved in the classroom. He's very eager to learn. But finally, at one point, I just said, I am so tired of this that I'm going to go to school and learn how to teach him how to read. And that's when I really learned about phonics and started my education toward becoming a reading specialist.
Yeah. Do you remember how you learned to read in school? Did they teach you phonics or
yeah, and
sight words?
My parents took an active role as well. I wanted to ask you, why did they take that out of curriculum?
That's the million-dollar question. They started, education is very funny. In education, everything goes on a pendulum. And so we have one thing that comes along that's very faddish, and then that kind of falls out of favor, and then we go to the other side. And sometimes I wonder if it's really just for publication of selling more materials. I'm not sure. But we moved toward, it was in 2014. It started much sooner than that. In my school district, they didn't introduce it till not 14, I'm sorry. Yes, it was 2014. And it's a cueing method. And it's really just teaching children to memorize words. You do a lot of, it's not even sight words, because the sight words, we always have sight words for words that, high frequency words, or words, they don't follow the patterns, the phonemic patterns, so you have to memorize those. But we moved in that direction, and so children stopped learning phonics and they just started to learn through memorization. And that was so detrimental to our children, because so many of our children need to be explicitly taught. And when they moved in that direction, children weren't explicitly taught, and they could only memorize so many words. So where I was teaching at the middle school, by the time children got to the middle school, they would then hit a wall. And I can't tell you how many meetings I was in for IEP meetings where children were referred, and I would have to tell parents that their child had a disability in reading. And of course, by that time, everybody's like, how could that be? Well, because they never learned how to attach words, they never learned how to segment them, so they had no idea when they got into multisyllabic words and more sophisticated words in the middle school, they were at a loss, and so they just hit a wall.
Well, do they really have a disability, or is it just that every child is different and they learn different? Like my son, my oldest son, I homeschooled him, and I was having a hard time with him with phonics, believe it or not. So I taught him to read with the Merrill Linguistic Reading Program, and after that he took off and could read. So, but every child's different. Like I remember being in second grade and standing by the meanest teacher in existence at the time, in the early 70s, and she would just, I didn't know if I got the word right or not because she wouldn't speak. So, and it was terrible. I had a very terrible time. I learned phonics with my kids.
Well, I learned phonics in college, and that's when I realized why I disliked school so much as a child, because I wasn't taught in a way that I could learn. And I totally agree with you. I question whether it's truly a disability, or are we just not teaching the way children learn. And one of the things is we've gotten into this, all children should know how to read or be able to reading by 6. That's really unrealistic.
A little boy wants to run around and play and eat dirt. And
well, it's absolutely true, but it goes beyond that, because technically the little child's brain is not physiologically ready at all times at 6 years old. It could be like my son, where he was still reversing letters, and when I brought him into the specialist, he said that's perfectly normal for children to reverse letters up until they're 8 years old.
Oh, wow, I did not know that.
So a lot of times now, even with my grandchildren, I worked with them, and I've seen this happen with other children as well, that even though I was doing phonics with them, like your son was having a hard time learning the phonics, they just weren't ready yet. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like they turned 8 years old, 8.5 years old, and everything just clicked, and they, boom, they took off.
Yeah.
But I really am sad for children that they're presented with this information or these strategies and things like that before they're ready to receive them. And then they get the message, or they come to the conclusion themselves that I'm just not good in reading, or I'm just not good at math. And it's really not at all the truth. The truth is they were just presented the information too soon. Most of the children with dyslexia, which would be the disability in reading, they are average to above average IQ, which allows them to fly under the radar, because they are able to create their own strategies and their own coping mechanisms. And so teachers don't even realize that they're really not reading. And so that's why then it comes up in the middle school. So I really can't even fault the teachers in the elementary school, because there's no way sometimes to know that the child is actually not reading, that they are just, this is all just memory, and that they're going to end up having a problem or challenges later.
Oh, wow. I did not know any of this.
Yeah, so this is why last year we put forward the dyslexia screening bill. And this is why, because it was very important that we screen children in kindergarten, first and second grade to see, are they at risk of not being able to read? Are they more right brain learners than left brain learners?
Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yes. So it's very interesting. It goes into a whole nother area, but we have the left brain learner who is much more analytical, and the right brain learner who is much more of the artistic. And even when I was teaching writing in the middle school, I would explain to my students, some of you are left brain learners, some are right brain learners. So when it comes to, you know how you would give teachers
I know that's
give,
a lot of pressure on
it's-
teachers too. I'm
well-
like sympathizing with them. You know, they have a class full of children, and they're all different. They're all learn at different rates. They learn different ways. One size does not fit all.
No, it doesn't. And that's why when I was saying going back to the writing, so if I was going to give the children something to help them to write, I would tell them to pick what works best, because some children do really well doing outlines and some children do really well with bubbles. Left brain learners love outlines, right brain learners love doing the bubbles and the mapping, and it's a different way of thinking. Both are correct. You have to allow the child to choose what works best for them. And that's the same with, that's in writing. Going back to reading, the challenge with the reading, when we moved to this other Fontes and Pinnell program, is the big one in New Hampshire. And that goes by the 3 cueing system, and it has the children memorizing words. They're not learning how to break words down. They're not introducing one syllable type at a time. You can look at the books that they give, and there's one little book and there's 5 different syllable types, and obviously a kindergarten has not learned 5 syllable types. But we just need to make sure that, the difference is a certain group of children can learn to read through a Fontes and Pinnell program. And then there's the children that need phonics, and they are not going to learn that way. But if we move over and teach all the children phonics, all the children will benefit, because those other learners will also learn through phonics. It doesn't go both ways. It only goes one way. Teach phonics, everyone learns. Stick to the old system, half of our children are left behind. So that was
Serious issue.
It's been a big, it's been a huge challenge. And even for me in the school system to try and get this message across that we need to switch. It was one of the reasons that I started a business of my own. I'm a special education advocate, so I would go in and I typically work with parents whose children are having difficulty reading. It still is very difficult. If the school district doesn't use a different program, then it's very hard to get them to use those programs.
Wow. So what can we do?
I have a question. Does the whole social media, electronics being introduced to kids at a younger and younger age, does that have any influence on this? Would children rather just look at a video than to actually read?
I'm not sure I could really answer that, because I don't know on those younger ages how much they're using it. I mean, that's how they would work in memorizing, because they're going to see the word often enough that they're going to memorize it. But certainly that's not going to increase their abilities in phonics.
Right.
So.
I don't know. When my son was really young and learning how to read, we had those Letter Factory videos, which were wonderful because it taught the phonics, and that's how we really got a jump start on reading at an early age. And so I don't know if video programs would be helpful in something like that.
Some of them can be, because we start reading, when we talk about phonics, we start with phonemic awareness. So that's where we come back and we're saying that the whole learning how to read, it starts with first making the identification of the letter and the letter sound. And that's where, for a child like my son who had significant ear infections, and then we noticed it through the immature speech, because he never actually was able to hear the articulation. Which is why the doctor said when he starts learning phonics, they'll get into phonemic awareness and he's going to learn specifically how to say each sound. That didn't necessarily work, but as we were able to adjust and get him to be able to hear better, he was able to hear the articulation, and you wouldn't know it by the time he got into grade school.
Wow. So there could be a lot of kids out there. I'm thinking my oldest, he had a lot of ear infections, and that poor kid.
That is one of the That's one of the red flags that I would always ask when children are having difficulty. It's did they have immature speech? Did they have a lot of ear infections? Because this all impacts the future of learning the phonemic awareness.
Wow. Now some kids are prodigies. Like our colleague, Representative Maureen Mooney, she has a niece who's the same age as I think it's my youngest. Yeah, I think my youngest son. it could have been the second to the youngest, one of those. They were in preschool together, and they'd bring home this stuffed animal, and then they had to write. Well, the parents did. They wrote about the weekend with Clarabelle the Clown, and we got the Clarabelle the Clown after Maureen's niece, and there was a whole page written, and it looked like a child wrote it. I said, they're 4 years old. 4 years old. I said, I talked to her mother, Maureen's sister, and I said, Margaret, did she write this? She said, yes. I said, she's 4. Who taught her to read? And she said she taught herself.
Yeah.
4-year-old girl taught herself to read, and she wrote a whole page about Clarabelle the Clown. I think it should have been framed and saved for.
So she would be like a reading prodigy, I guess, but we see that all the time. Years ago, you don't hear about it much anymore, but when I first went into education, the big thing was teaching toward the child's strengths. And each child, we have different intelligences. So there are some children that can just play music. It's just innate. There are some children that are able to dance, and there's different, there's all of these different intelligences, and they come into the classroom, which is why the teacher has to be able to be more creative in how she's teaching and try and get onto all these different intelligences to allow the child to be able to show what they know. And as much as it's a challenge, it's also what makes teaching so enjoyable, because you get to do all these different things with the children, and they're able to show what they know through different means.
I'm always impressed by kids that have gifts, like if they could draw, or because something I can't do. I can't draw, so
yeah. And we have children that
they could sing and
athletic abilities. I mean, some children are just born natural athletes. It's just in them. It's just
comics. I had a few comics.
Oh yeah, those are the fun ones.
Yes.
Yes.
So wow. So what can we do as state legislators to improve reading in New Hampshire, or do we just leave it at the local level and not worry about it?
Do you want to say anything, Rob? I hate to be taking over the conversation here.
No, you're the star.
Okay. Well, as I said, I've been working on this for 30 years, and I actually ran for the school board in my hometown of Salem. I lost by 64 votes, which really was pretty good, considering I was going up against incumbents that were 15 and 18 years there. And honestly, I approached it and was very honest in telling people, I don't expect to get elected to the school board. I just want to start this conversation and looking at the proficiency scores and all of that. And when I didn't win, I waited a little while, and then I said to myself, there's a reason for everything, and I think the reason is because I should be in the State House, because this isn't just a Salem problem, or it wouldn't be just a Merrimack problem or a Milford problem. This is a statewide problem when we look at our proficiency scores. So I ran last year, and I did win the election.
We're glad.
One of 9 in Salem. And I immediately brought forward House Bill 1015, which was to change the way we teach, not just teach reading, but the way we approach reading and education in general in the classroom.
Bringing it back to the basics.
Bringing it back to the basics, yes. And last year, I was working with the vice chair of the Education Committee, Representative Glenn Cordelli, who's a wonderful person, and he was great to work with, and we worked together. He incorporated some of the things that I brought forward. I also have a special education background, so it was a lot of terminology that I felt should be in there. Unfortunately, his bill was tabled last year, and I pulled my bill last year out of respect for Representative Cordelli, but then this year I brought my bill forward again. Mine is much simpler. It's one paragraph, changes the existing law, and we were able to get that through. And so now it's sitting on Governor Sununu's desk.
Wow.
And we're hoping for it to be signed. It does go a little bit beyond reading. It does require systematic, explicit instruction in the general education classroom in all public schools and charter schools. That's a very important component because children need to be explicitly taught. We can't expect that children are going to learn through osmosis or figure it out on their own. Many children just have to be told exactly what they need to learn and how to do it. So that includes the 5 components of reading, which would be, I'll probably mess it up now, phonemic awareness, phonics, comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency. And then in addition to that, we are bringing back, because believe it or not, it was removed from many curriculums throughout the state, would be grammar and mechanics in writing and spelling.
Oh, is that like diagramming sentences?
Yes.
Wow.
So, I mean, you don't have to get so much into the diagramming sentence, but children need to know how to form a sentence in order to understand where to put the commas, how to put the punctuation. So that's included, and then also mathematics is also included for math calculation, math fluency, and mathematical reasoning, really, which is really important that these all be taught through explicit systematic instruction.
So when I was schooling my oldest kids, they had phonics books. And I would use language like, oh, this word has a secret code. You know, the secret code is like the two little dots above the O, or, you know, what do you call those things?
Don't ask me.
But that was always fun, you know, the word attack. I remember us doing lessons on that with the secret code. It's got a secret code on this word.
Yeah, we didn't, you know, to be honest with you, I did it in special education, and I never really got into that because, in a sense, I was teaching more of the secret code of understanding the syllables. And that just wasn't, you know, you have to pick and choose what you're going to emphasize, but the secret code would have been the magic E on the end of the word.
Yeah.
And so we knew it was a long, or the secret code of understanding if it's a closed or an open syllable, or if it's a consonant LE syllable. So if the children could start recognizing the syllable types, they would automatically know
I just
how it sounds.
thought of a little song we used to sing.
Yes.
When two bells go a-walking, the first one does the talking. The first one says his name. The second one is silent.
Yes.
So we had a lot of fun little
There's
quips.
a lot of cute little songs and things that you can
I
do
before
with
E
that.
except after C. Or that's another one. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of those don't necessarily always hold true.
That is true.
So
I'm like,
then
oh wait,
it gets,
except for that word. Yeah.
Yeah, except for this one. You know, so then we have the exceptions. But, you know, I think that, you know, one of the reasons you had asked earlier, why did we move away from this? And something that was told to me a long time ago, it just came back to my mind, is that the teacher said it wasn't fun teaching.
Okay, I was just going to ask you, as you were working on this legislation, did you get a lot of feedback from teachers or schools in support or against? Was there a lot of difficulty?
So I will tell you that when the Fontes and Pinnell program was first introduced in my school district, and we were trained in it, that day, all of us who were being trained, they would have been the English language learning teachers, speech and language, the special education teacher, the reading, we all immediately said, this isn't going to work. So behind the scenes, there have been for years many teachers that have been coming forward and saying, this isn't working, it's not working. So I didn't have any, I did get support bringing my bill forward. I didn't get anyone coming forward and saying we should not do that.
Okay.
So
good.
Yeah, it was very...
And the Department of Education, were they behind?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I would not introduce anything without bringing it to our commissioner, Edelblue, first.
Yes.
And so I brought all of this to him and asked him what his thoughts were. He didn't have he didn't have a problem with it because he's already put the Letters program.
Yeah.
If you look on the state, there's a program called Letters, and I actually did that when I was working in Hampstead. And it's a great program because it teaches all these phonics and all these different strategies. But I did go back to him and I said, well, it's a wonderful program. However, you can't implement it in the general education classroom when you're using a program like Fontes and Pinnell, which is all a scripted program. Then how do you add this in? So there was that little stumbling block, and I think that's why we're very glad. Not to mention the fact that the Fontes and Pinnell program, the linguist came out and they basically debunked the program and said it does not work.
Wow. Well, your bill, was it 1015, had good bipartisan support because we all care about our kids and we all want our kids to be able to read. Right. So I think we have that in common.
It was definitely bipartisan. I presented it to the Education Committee, and I had not campaigned to the Democrat side of the committee, but they came up to me afterwards and said they would like to support my bill. So we ended up bringing it forward. Representative Cascadin, the Democrat, and we amended the bill so that it wouldn't go in effect for 3 years. So the school districts can start sooner, but we are giving a 3-year allowance of time to get this into the classroom. Because of the feedback that we got that the budgets are already made for next year, so they need to work this into their budget. And then the other is just to allow for time for teacher training and also to allow time for piloting the program. So many districts are already moving in that direction, but we've given some leeway to the other districts to be able to have this time to kind of get all their ducks in a row.
So you're finishing up your freshman term, and you've proven to be a very effective legislator.
Thank you.
So I hope that you come back.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So just, you're on the Children and Family Law Committee?
Yes.
And Vanessa,
Legislative administration.
you're the vice chair, aren't you?
Correct.
And this is your second term?
Yes.
Well, I hope you'll be coming back to the legislature
Absolutely.
too. So, and you're both
great.
wonderful ladies. So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being
Thank
on my
you for
show.
having me.
Thanks, Janine.
Thank you. And thank you for watching.